Hello and welcome to today's webinar, How Law Firms Cleverly Use Analytics to Improve Profits, hosted by Rosslyn Analytics with Linklaters. A quick piece about today's agenda, a small piece about the speakers, a small piece about Rosslyn Analytics, the use of data in law firms, the evolution of procurement in law firms, the value of data for procurement, for finance and to manage compliance, and for ITC, and then a question and answer session at the end. We would encourage you to use the question button on the website to place your questions, and we can answer them as best we can later on. So, a small piece about the speakers. I'm Paul Cook, Vice President of Global Sales here at Rosslyn Analytics. In a previous life, I was a CPO, so I understand some of the pressures and pain that people face in that role. Unfortunately, I wasn't lucky enough to have tools such as Rosslyn, and I know the benefit that would have brought me. We also have Jeff Young, who's Global Strategic Sourcing Manager at Linklaters. Jeff's been in this position for 3 years, and his main role is to act as an advisor to the business on key sourcing engagements. Prior to this current role, he spent 10 years in management consulting focused on advising global law firms on non-salary cost reduction initiatives. Welcome, Jeff, and we look forward to hearing from you very soon. So a little bit of background on who Rosslyn are. We're a global leading tech company with a mission to make data accessible and better for decision makers. We floated on the AIM exchange in 2014. We're headquartered here in London with offices in Buffalo, Denver and Chicago. We have 1 patent pending, 1 application pending, and we have over 100 customers and partners globally. So what do? We provide a single destination for business user-driven self-service data preparation, analytics and data management. We were the first to integrate and automate the different stages that data goes through to become meaningful information for the business users such as yourselves. This means you can spend more time on the high-value analytics and trying to wrangle with your data. A small overview of some of our clients and partners. There are many names on here that I'm sure you'll recognise. Companies such as Boots and Xerox and Coca-Cola. We also have many of the top 5 law firms within our client base. We also have some very exciting partners, and you can see from here people like Cognizant, Exchanging, SAP, Xerox, Genpact, to name but a few. We have a very strong partner base, which we're very proud of. So the evolution of analytics in law firms. Law firms are in an interesting position at the moment, as we'll explore in more detail later, but they're facing a number of internal and external pressures to remain competitive and outperform their peers. It's true that law firms have it tough. Clients want more value for less, which means new pricing models are needed and the cost of business operations is increasing. During the recession, clients spend less. As the economy turns around, client spending will remain tight, so law firms need to focus on reducing costs as well as delivering more value-added services to their clients. Key efficiencies and savings will be delivered in the back office and how client-facing teams can deliver these services, e.g. by automating business processes and outsourcing legal services respectively. This means that the traditional methods of working are not efficient, and insight is needed into areas such as client billing and profitability to help law firms develop new strategies and pricing models. Added to this, competition is heating up. Firms need to have greater industry insight and commercial acumen to succeed in an ever-increasing competitive global market. More is being spent on technology. According to an ILTA survey, half of respondents indicated that they wanted to implement business intelligence or analytics, and 31 cited managing spend as a key consideration. But how can firms get the most out of their implementations? All of these factors point to an overall need for more insight to achieve these goals and respond to some of the key questions facing the legal sector today. There are a number of key questions facing the legal sector today. We've outlined some of them here, covering fraud cases and profits per partner, such as: are we over-serving our clients? Where in the organisation are we not compliant with anti-bribery laws? Which of our lawyers are the most efficient and profitable, and why? Questions will only continue to grow in size and scope, and we can't always be predicted. So how can we answer some of these questions and overcome the issues? Analytics is key. However, it's a huge challenge. Firms face a huge challenge. Existing IT is not fit for purpose in the current market landscape, and there's significant data challenge to overcome. Law firms face a huge challenge in being able to answer these questions and get ahead of the game. How can the legal industry get its insight and develop the new business model required for these business efficiencies? Additionally, in many cases, existing IT is not fit for purpose in the current market landscape. But historically, law firms have adopted multiple point solutions in their technology stack, and it's difficult to overcome. And there is a significant data challenge to overcome. The biggest data challenge facing firms is that 90% of the data is inaccessible to decision makers and is not fit for purpose. Firms have also traditionally not invested in firm-wide analytics, which limits the potential outcomes and opportunities from effective analytics. So what opportunities and value are firms missing out on? There's so much commercial value that comes from data. Financial, say, revenue profitability, spend, cost saving, compliance, risk management, client profitability, maybe big data, social media and other non- and semi-structured data sources. In a more specific level, there are a number of practical applications of legal analytics, such as legal spending, pricing certain matters and cost management for the law department and outside counsel costs, litigation strategy, going down to a micro level for evidential analysis, contract management, using analytics to create the best-in-class contract agreement specific to different functional areas, risk management, identifying potentially risky areas and mitigating those risks. So procurement in law firms, this is where I'd like to bring in Jeff, who will explore some of the key areas and opportunities in analytics in a bit more detail. Over to you, Jeff, and welcome.
Hello, and thank you for inviting me to share some of my views on how law firms currently use analytics to improve their profits. Perhaps before I begin, I can give you a little bit more detail of my professional background. Prior to joining Linklaters as the Global Strategic Sourcing Manager 3 years ago, I was a management consultant in the legal space for approximately 10 years, advising global law firm businesses in Asia, Europe, and U.S. on sourcing strategies, specifically non-salary cost reduction strategies in all categories of spend. This typically led into other engagement focused on process and transactional efficiency studies and advice, for example, contract management solutions, spend analytics, organizational structures, that is procurement transformation, outsourcing, etc. Having experience working closely with procurement teams and procurement professionals at other Magic Circle firms, top U.S. law firms, and other Europe and Asia offices, it is clearly apparent to me that there is a need for procurement professionals in legal. However, for various reasons, we haven't been able to shrug off the stereotype that procurement is purely transactional, that is all about processing POs, managing RFPs, etc. I would like to change this view of procurement in legal and demonstrate that we do add strategic value. However, it's not going to be easy, and we will require much work from procurement professionals in this space. So over the next few slides, I would like to share with you my views and hope to have a fruitful discussion. Before I dive into the topic of procurement, I'd like to just quickly take you through a brief overview of the historical and current state of procurement in law firms and where it is currently heading or should be heading. Historically, and in some firms currently, the role of procurement in law firms has or is traditionally focused on transactions largely in the IT category. Therefore, most sourcing professionals in legal may begin their career in this function. Much of the policies and procedures would have been driven out of IT sourcing. Logically, this does make sense, as IT is where the majority of law firms spend their money outside of operational costs such as premises, leases, and facilities management. However, much of the other spend in law firms were and still are managed by budget holders in their respective functions. For example, stationery, document storage, retention, destruction, leases, books and subscription, catering, human resources, etc. Though increasingly some functions such as information services, that is the books and subscriptions that law firms purchase, they have brought in specialty category buyers for this particular need. As much as I agree that having expertise in a specific category is valuable, there is also a risk that this expertise becomes too silo-driven, and by not having a holistic view of buying for the firm, they may miss out on opportunities. Also, because of the value of IT procurement that which they have brought to IT purchases. Other functions are looking for similar support in sourcing their respective goods or services. However, the spend in those other categories are too low to warrant an additional headcount specifically for sourcing. So law firms either continue to approach buying in a very transactional way, and therefore they continue to have budget holders directly buy and negotiate on behalf of the business. They're also looking on bringing on sourcing generalists or even consulting help that would be brought in to support budget holders in these other categories of spend. Unlike other professional services firms, such as the Big Four, where they have a more centralized procurement team, law firms have a devolved buying environment where the buyers are the budget holders. In this type of buying environment, there may be one or two professionals with generalist skills who will provide a center of excellence to all functions. However, the challenge for procurement here is getting buy-in from its stakeholders, especially functions such as IT, where procurement is much more mature and drives much of the sourcing policies and procedures. This is why procurement in law firms has been all about being a quote-unquote business partner or trusted advisor, as you've all probably heard over and over again. I agree with this cliche. However, in order to be this business partner or trusted advisor, procurement professionals in law firms need to take a more methodical, fact-based approach to gaining the trust of stakeholders and influence buying behaviors. I will go more into this in my next slide in a few minutes, where I will address the approach I take to identifying opportunities. Where we are heading, or at least should be trying to head into, is to continue to support the indirect spend categories, but additionally move more and more into direct spend areas, such as virtual data rooms, e-discovery, transactional support services, matter management technology, outside counsel, litigation support services, legal technology, etc., just to name a few. Typically, these costs are never addressed as they do not hit anyone's direct budget. That is, like your cost centers. These are typically practice-related costs and are generally thought of being charged back to the client. However, increasingly, clients are asking to do more with less and are putting pressure on our fees, just like we do to our suppliers. So generally, the first item to be reduced or eliminated from a client's fees are the non-professional fee-related items. Therefore, providing sourcing expertise in this area is key if we want to strive to deliver better value and services and service to our clients. Additionally, some procurement functions are getting involved in pitch work to provide guidance and their view from a procurement perspective on how to respond to client RFPs, since the process is generally being driven by the client's procurement team, specifically in the legal services category. This involvement allows client procurement teams to speak the same language, and we can therefore provide support to the business in this process, since we already run these processes all the time with our indirect suppliers. Furthermore, there is much we can learn from the process that we may be able to leverage or improve upon our own internal process with our suppliers. Procurement and law firms need to be more proactive in getting into the client-facing spend areas such as litigation support and transaction support technology. We need to work more closely with our IT, strategy, and business management teams, if your organizations have those, to provide a more methodical, fact-based approach to buying and identifying opportunities for the business to deliver increased value and efficiencies to our clients. This brings me to the next slide, where I'll talk more about the approach I take to identifying opportunities and engaging with stakeholders. As I mentioned earlier, procurement and law firms have generally spent most of their time in the two phases of this process that I've laid out here in gray: supplier engagement and contract execution. These phases involve activities such as RFPs, negotiations, consultation support, etc. I've listed a few more activities that I think we should be more involved with, though currently it may be just limited touch points depending on the structure of the sourcing projects. So these include contract negotiations, pricing strategies, SLA and KPI developments, just to name a few. Where I think procurement and law firms can add more strategic value and where the opportunities are identified are in the first two phases. So this involves getting early involvement with sourcing projects across the firm. So this would include data gathering and business case development. I think a critical part of the entire sourcing process starts at the data gathering. I believe that this is not just about looking at budget reports, supplier quarterly management reports, etc. This is about tapping into the raw data that is sitting in your financial system, whether it be SAP, Oracle, Elite, etc. This is where the Rosslyn Rapid Platform has been very helpful for our organization. However, regardless of the technology platform you do use to get your data, even if it is going directly to your financial system, even if it is going directly into your financial system to get it, which I know is a huge pain and very time-consuming. You first and foremost, you need to understand what data you need, what you are looking at, and how to analyze and present the information in a way that a fact-based decision can be made and support the business strategies. These two phases of the methodology can be supported by technology, like I said. However, this is the area where procurement professionals should start and can differentiate themselves and add increasing value to the business. This will require procurement, like I said, to be involved very early on in any sourcing engagement. Therefore, we either have to engage more proactively with the functions and insert ourselves into the process and be part of that project team, or vice versa. Have those projects know that the sourcing team is available to be involved in these engagements. Again, the challenge here is, how do we become that quote-unquote trusted advisor and business partner to key stakeholders? And my answer to that is to have a fact-based analytical approach to engaging stakeholders. Having involvement in the first two phases will then lend itself well to providing valuable input into the next two phases, the supplier engagement and contract execution. Improved results will come from the RFP process as requirements will be more thoroughly fleshed out given the work completed in the data gathering and business case development phases. Negotiations will be enhanced and not just based on a tit-for-tat negotiation style or a zero-sum game. There will be opportunities to be more creative in your negotiations, not only with the services, but I believe also with pricing. For example, we can look at cost per office, headcount per fee earners, and cost per office, cost per headcount, cost per fee earners, etc., can be suggested as a pricing structure to suppliers, if that is what is appropriate. I mean, that's just an example. But essentially, given the analysis developed in the initial phases, would provide some alternative pricing suggestions that can be presented to the suppliers, but equally, and most importantly, it can be defended by facts. So whether or not your supplier accepts it, it is obviously that obviously comes down to the art of the negotiations and your individual style. However, the argument is that it is a logical and fact-based approach. This is just a few examples of how these transactional phases can be enhanced. Finally, procurement involvement shouldn't end with the contract execution. It should continue on with supporting and even driving the supplier management phase, working closely with the stakeholder until the time of renewal, termination, or consideration of a new purchase. Much of this support can be driven from the data analysis that the procurement team can provide to the stakeholders in this phase. Technology platforms such as Rosslyn Rapid can provide support to the procurement teams as all data related to suppliers, that is invoice, contract information, management data, can be linked or at least stitched together to provide meaningful supplier spend reporting to the stakeholders. This will then support the meetings that the stakeholders will have with the suppliers, so we're not hugely dependent on the information that the suppliers provide us, but we can actually use the information that we have and analyze and view it in the way that we want to see it. So this brings me to my next topic regarding how procurement can use data analytics to drive and assess some finance-related reporting that generally is probably quite difficult to do straight out of your respective financial systems.
Finance and law firms generally have the task of reporting mostly on revenue, budgets, forecast revenues. As this is the main focus of law firms. I mean, we are driven to drive more revenue. I think most businesses do focus a lot on that. However, when it comes to reporting regularly supplier spend or matter-related spend, for that matter, sometimes this information provided, in my opinion, isn't always what the CFO, COO, or business manager needs to help make strategic decisions. Furthermore, they are relying on finance to provide them information they think they need or is available to drive strategic business decisions. Sometimes we have to question these. Am I looking at the correct information to help make a sound decision? I think the underlying issue is I think we don't clearly know what is what is available in our data. I think going back to one of Paul's comments, I think he addressed about 90% of the data I think in systems. Correct me if I'm wrong, but is not reported on our known. I can attest to that. There's a lot of data that sits in our financial system that we probably aren't using. We have the question, have we been collecting the right information? Is that information being collected correctly? Is it accurate? And Rosslyn does help us, with enrichment, but even enriching data doesn't necessarily get you to 100% accuracy. We're not trying to get that accurate, but we also have to look at it and understand what are we trying to achieve. And just to make, just to say this is no fault to anyone or any function. Just requires, someone in the practice. I think it starts with procurement, but an appetite for this information. Since I think procurement professionals are tasked with looking at supplier spend, and where do you go? Well, you got to go to the finance systems. But then people have to ask the right questions or hypothesize scenarios that require data to support or dismiss the hypothesis. So we need to ask, what data do we have, and if we don't have it, where is it, and how do we get it? So it brings me to the next slide here on finance, and I know one of the topics I wanted to address was around how do we assess supplier payments and how to increase the profitability. But I think along that line, I think there's a lot of information that we can get out of our financial systems. Whether so I've listed here a few. Big ERP systems that law firms uses, and you probably recognize a few of them. But what's interesting is that some of these, some law firms actually use a multitude of some of these systems. For one for finance, one for HR, for example, and that causes issues. So we're not actually looking at our data in one place. And so platforms like Rosslyn has enabled firms to businesses to do that. So really, I think this poses a challenge for not only procurement, but people that want the information and looking at different metrics. How do we report on these things, and what do we really need to know? So it's I believe whatever technology is implemented. Even back in the day when you implement these big ERP systems, there needs to be a deeper understanding of what is in your systems, what data is available, and what data, if it's not available, can we include that as part of our analysis? I think we even need to question some of the data that is already in our system, like I said, and to ensure that it is accurate. It may require some sort of data enrichment to give meaningful, high-level, fact-based results. So I reiterate, deep understanding is required in procurement, again, because we do a lot of this analytics around supplier information. I think that has given us the expertise and the experience with data mining. So we can probably tap into a lot of the HR data or whatever other data is available in your respective data sources. So I think the underlying question is, how do law firms use analytics to improve profits? So how do we use it? Well, I believe firstly that we need to ask the question, what can we do to improve profits? It's not a question about will analytics solve our issues. No, it's what can we do to improve profits? So this is about developing some hypotheses around the question. For example, let's reduce our operating costs, specifically travel costs. So this is just an example, very simple example. We can take then the approach that I've outlined in my previous slide, starting with the data gathering. This is where we need to then understand the data we require to support or dismiss our hypothesis. Once we determine what data we need to figure out where it is and how we access it. Then we can begin to use analytics to determine our answer. This sounds quite simple, quite straightforward. I'm sure everyone goes through a process like this. But I think it's through this process we will learn quickly what we're looking for to achieve by data analytics. So I think data analytics is not the solution per se, but I think it helps us get to those answers. So I think we definitely have to take a step back and ask the right questions first, and then use data analytics and understand what data we have available to support or dismiss some of our hypotheses. So if I could provide any recommendations to our listeners on this webinar on becoming a more effective and impactful analytical procurement team to enable the business to be more profitable, among other things. I would recommend a few things. So on the next slide, I do have, and again, these are probably ever-changing, and it's open to debate, but these are some of the things that I've seen over the past couple of years of what I think becoming a more effective and analytical procurement team. So a lot of it is probably common sense, but collaborate more with your finance team. And I say this, I would say this is probably the most important, I think, because when we're presenting supplier spend information, is not necessarily what our quote-unquote buyers or budget holders are expecting. And we need to understand what data finance is showing them, because they've been sharing this information with them over the past 10, 15, however long they've been reporting on cost centers or profit centers. So we need to ensure that we are on the same page with finance. Collaborating with finance is quite important. I said, know what you want to achieve. You definitely want to know from, data analyst is kind of a high-level, discussion about, but what do you want to achieve with that? So going back to, developing the hypothesis about, well, I want to reduce costs. Where are the areas that we can reduce costs and how we can get there? So then identifying, so know your data. So what data do you want? What data, so point 4, what data do you need? Okay, and if it's not there, how are you going to get it? And, to my previous slide, a lot of organizations have various data sets in various places. So you need to know how to stitch that data together. There might not be a common denominator for each of the data sets, so you might need to enrich that data somehow. And technology doesn't necessarily do that for you. So there is a human element to understanding, and going back to my point, know your data and know how to stitch that data so that you can produce relevant information to your senior management. I think understand, so if you are doing data enrichment, you need to, I guess, document it or understand the methodology behind that. How you're mapping the information. And I point that out in number 8, but know how you're enriching the data, how you're categorizing data, because you have to explain that clearly and articulate that to your stakeholders, because you are presenting some information in a different way, hopefully in a more clear and articulate manner. 7, again, on enrichment, know what data you want to be enriched. So for example, we collect invoice transaction detail, but if you try to run a categorization on that level of detail, you're not going to be able to categorize it. So you're going to have to either create a new category or enrich that somehow. So categorizing that spend in the way that will make sense to you and to your stakeholders is quite important. Think categorically, and this is kind of common sense. We think we have buying categories, in IT and books and subscriptions, etc. But I think from a very high level, when you're working with raw data, you need to think, how can I categorize this information? Not necessarily by category, but even any type of data you're looking at, you need to think about it categorically. How can you group that information to something that will make clear sense to your stakeholders? 9, and this is something that I try to drive home, is persistence and patience. This is changing the way people think. This is changing the way people behave, their buying behaviors, and you are, I guess in the law firm, as procurement in a law firm, you are in a sense an internal consultant. You are advising them, and you might be advising somebody that has been, working in this area for 15 years, and so they may have some pushback. But persistence, working with patience. Like I said, I've been in 3 years, and I see it pay off. You're not going to get everybody on board. But I think finding those quick wins and getting that support from key functions that don't have procurement support, such as your operations teams, knowledge and learning, marketing, get those wins, then you can start developing more of a strategic role within the firm. And I think we all think strategically, but I think bottom line is we have to act analytically, and that goes back to the 5 phases of that methodology. Data gathering, data analysis, business case development. I think we all have big ideas of cost reduction. It's very easy, but we have to act on that as a very analytical approach. But we have to be careful. We can run into analysis paralysis, as you always heard, so there has to be that fine balance. So I think as procurement professionals in the legal space, we can provide that fine balance between thinking strategically and doing enough analysis given the facts, given the data, to come up with a more effective decision making. So just to end with, I hope that a wider discussion around this, in general in business, not just in law firms, how are we using analytics to improve their business can continue as an outcome of this webinar. I don't think any business or industry has a definitive answer to this question, but I think this is my first webinar, but I think by not sharing our thoughts, the knowledge in the space will inhibit us. It's not a secret. It's a process, a methodology, and I think if we don't share this type of information, it will inhibit us as procurement professionals and equally business owners, CEOs, CEOs, et cetera, to be better decision makers. So, like I said before, we need to think strategically and act analytically, and that's it. Thanks for listening, and so I will happy to take questions after the webinar is over, or feel free to contact me. I don't know if my contact information is available, but I'm more than happy to continue this discussion. So I turn it over back to Paul for the remainder of the webinar. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jeff. That was very interesting, and there's already been a few questions put into the system as you've been speaking, so we look forward to bringing you back in to answer some of those. So as you can see from my next slide, the issues that data face isn't just in finance. There are also additional areas outside procurement where data is invaluable. Compliance is a key area where data visibility is a must. You have to ensure that you're up to date with the latest regulations and standards, and to be able to effectively monitor and respond to the ever-changing legal landscape, as well as proactively monitor and negate risk. So it's about taking that data, bringing that data into a single format, into a single place, and using the data to the best of your abilities. So what about ITC? How does the value of data arrive? It's true that law firms are typically run by IT. IT can be a hero by providing data services to business users. They can improve customer service to employees by empowering business users. And legal analytics are vital in helping law firms transition their businesses to succeed. However, this is very time-consuming and costly. It creates an extra burden on already overstretched IT departments. By providing data services to businesses, users, and empowering self-service analytics, IT can be seen as a hero and effectively improve their customer service to other employees. And by doing this, you'll have a knock-on effect in enabling the rest of the organization to take charge of their own analytical needs. And that means more time can be spent on analytics and adding value as a result of interpreting the data correctly. So, what is the future? Well, I see in the future, technology will play a greater role in the success of law firms. Data will become a top priority. And then getting this data out to as many people as possible will be a critical stage in the progression of law firms. Centralizing your data and analytics will differentiate the leaders from the followers. It will improve decision making, it will deliver real efficiency, and it will enable innovation. And I think innovation is a key part of going forward anywhere. Here at Rosslyn, we do innovation plans for our customers. So we don't have account managers, we have customer success managers and customer innovation managers. And it's all about how can we use that data, how can we let this innovation take hold in organizations, what can we see in the data that you can't see, and how can we help you embrace that and enhance that. Now, we're going to move on to questions. There are some questions coming in. We have a little bit of time left, so we would like to use this time in answering those questions. The first one I think is interesting, and it'd be interesting to take the view of an older procurement guy like myself who's not been a procurement director for many years, and a younger procurement guy like Jeff. But the first question, what type of skill sets should procurement teams have?
And Jeff, forgive me, but I'd like to sort of answer this one first and think that, in my view, procurement teams need a range of skill sets. It's not just about negotiation. They need to have social skill sets. They also need to have analytical skill sets. Whenever you embark on any procurement project, the first question you need to know is, where are we? And if you haven't got the data, if you don't actually know where you are in terms of what you're stepping out to buy, what your needs and what your wants are as a business, you're going to be wasting your time if you even start a procurement project. Jeff, what is your view on that?
I agree with that. Analytical skills are a requirement, I think, these days. In order to drive value and actually to be, an active or more proactive and influencing business partner for the business. I also think these are big projects in a sense. So you have to have some sort of project management skills or background with each of these engagements. So going back to the five phases that I've outlined in my slide, I definitely think that that is a project in itself, and you need to be able to manage your stakeholders, know what resources you need, and have a timeline. So like I said, like you mentioned, social skills, being able to just get out there. And unfortunately, I think historically, again, I probably have a more recent, current view of what procurement, but talking to some of my colleagues in our SIPs, the Institute of Procurement Supply, colleagues in manufacturing and retail and the likes, outside of professional services. They can sit in a silo and not necessarily reach out because people come to them, but I think they need to be more proactive. They need to challenge. They need to have that comfort zone and not just fall into, hey, we're just transactional. We're very similar to like HR. I think HR has fallen into that kind of. They had that issue before. It was just a process, hiring. But I think dealing with suppliers is the strategic part of your business. So, yep.
Okay. Thank you, Jeff. So the next question we have is definitely aimed at you, Jeff. But again, I'd like to try and answer it first. It's what are some of the main challenges you have overcome? Sorry, what are some of the main challenges you have come across with implementing a data analytics platform such as Rosslyn? Now, speaking on behalf of Rosslyn, where we have done hundreds of implementations, the key challenge is always data extraction. People say, oh, our data's oven ready, it's good to go. In reality, it isn't. It's in disparate systems, it's in disparate formats, and it needs to be put together. And the big challenge we face is getting people to understand that, by using simple data extraction tools that we've built, you can easily and simply get your data from your many source systems into a single format in the cloud very easily. Jeff, you had real-time experience of this. Where do you feel this is?
Yeah, I agree. Extraction is a key part of it. I think having the right people in the implementation stage, in the early stages that understand the data that we need to get extracted is critical. That is key. You need to know what data is available and what data is going to be extracted. But I also think there's going to be some teething problems, of course, for any technology that's being implemented. But there needs to be a single owner of the technology. And I think most technology that's implemented sometimes gets owned by IT. But that's not necessarily should be the case, especially if a tool is being used for a particular function's role, such as Rosslyn. We need to own it, so procurement owns it, but they need to understand the technology and the capabilities of it. IT is there just for support issues, but they shouldn't be owning it. So I think that is one of the challenges: is getting buy-in, finding an owner of the technology, and then evangelizing it. So it's about selling and getting it out there.
Yeah, but very good answer. I think the other challenge actually that you mentioned there is user adoption. people think that these systems are difficult, they're complex. I'm going to need a degree in rocket science to look at my data. In effect, using Rapid is easier than using your smartphone. It is an app-based product. It is every app that you need at your fingertips. It's just the same as using your iPhone. You just point and shoot, and you get the answers that you need.
Yes.
But that is a challenge. People think, how am I going to get my end users to pick this up? And in fact, it is an easy thing to do.
Mm-hmm. And I think we have to understand who our end users should be. And I think just from our experience, we did roll it out to, I mentioned, our quote unquote buyers of the organization. So these are service managers, these are finance managers, these are HR managers. But unfortunately, those aren't. They all they need is information. So I think we, as a procurement function, need to own it. We need to understand it and provide information very quickly to them.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. We have another question, and I started first, so I'll let you start first this time, Jeff. The question says, what suggestions do you have in approaching the practice side of the business with opportunities to improve their business? So I guess this is saying, how can you use data and data opportunities to improve the business?
Yeah, like I mentioned before, especially in the law in the legal space, how do we get more involved with the practice? And that's, we have to think like lawyers. How do they engage with their clients? Well, they go through facts. They present facts. Not saying that, generally speaking, we don't present the facts, but if we have tools such as Rosslyn Rapid to allow us to do these analytics, to dive into the data that we couldn't actually access very quickly or efficiently by directly going to our financial systems, we can use this, present it in a manner, and build our business case. And I think by approaching them in that manner, again, it's going to take probably a few times for them to get an understanding of what you are showing them. It starts to spark their interest. There starts to be more discussion. Here at Linklaters, 3 years ago, we started to show the spend of supplier that we never had before. I mentioned before, a lot of the spend in professional disbursements and other service items that are driven, that are typically driven by the practice, they're never shown, unless it's asked for, because those are costs that are typically passed on to the client. Like I mentioned, increasingly clients are pushing back on fees, and those are the first to go. So those are the things that we need to focus on. And I think by presenting that, by using analytics, showing the facts, presenting it in a manner very clear. It has to be very clear. You have to think about, you're not presenting them a 10-page dossier about their spend. It's about, one page spark for their interest, and then let them kind of drive, the questions and go from there. And like I said, one of the points, be patient and persevere through this.
Yeah, so that's a very good answer. I think that there are other opportunities that data will show you, and again, using the Rapid platform at Rosslyn, you can identify areas such as cost-saving opportunities or payment-saving opportunities, or supplier rationalization, product rationalization, price rationalization. By bringing your disparate data together, you're seeing the sort of sways in price that you're paying for the same product from the same supplier, because the rep's done a better deal in one office than another. Also, there's the ability to look at your contracts and your payment terms. So actually, we're paying these guys too quickly, or we're paying these guys too late, and what's the effect on our business for that? We firstly would like to thank you all for taking the time to listen to us today. We're delighted that you have. Huge thanks to Jeff. That was very, very interesting, and thank you so much for doing that. I know you're a busy guy, and really appreciate the time you put into this today.
Not a problem at all. I'm happy to participate.
Okay, thank you all, and we look forward to seeing you on another webinar in the future. Thank you very much.